Spoiler. Season 11, episode 2. But first, I want to mention that there's an episode called Before the Drop. So that's the whole episode that shows how they set the show up, how they take the people out, and they're in the area for about a week before they're actually, start the series. And it's just interesting to see the logistics, being interested in ham radio and everything, having a ham radio license. They're not using ham radios, but they have repeaters that they set up because they've got to be able to keep in touch with everyone, and they're using walkie-talkies. Now, everybody has a satellite phone too, so that's when they need to talk to when the participants need to talk to a crew in an emergency, the sat phone goes on. But these other radios are used with the crew, in between the crew, for everything they're doing. And sometimes you'll see them go like on a medical check or something, and they'll be talking to someone else. And that probably 5-watt radio can't really go that far. And so what you do is you put these antennas up, and one will take a signal in and transmit it on another frequency. Well, your radio's set up to hear that frequency and then transmit on the other frequency. And that means you can have these things, I don't know how many of them they put up, but you could put up a couple, and you could blanket the area and have really good coverage everywhere. And that's basically what they do. But today was interesting because this season 11, episode 2, because it highlights 2 people that didn't bring ferro rods, which is kind of unusual because, you're in an area that's going to be really cold. You kind of usually don't want to mess around with trying to make a fire and have that take as little time as possible. So you bring this ferro rod, a rod that you scrape. This is a really inexpensive one, but, you take this, scrape it with the back of a striker. You can use different things for a striker. This came with this. And you can scratch that along it, and it will throw sparks. Well, that's only good if you have dry tinder. The dry tinder catches. Then you put on kindling, which is smaller wood, and then eventually you get up to what you would call fuel size things that you're burning. So every time you want to disinfect water, every time you want to cook something, every time you want to get warm, you want to be able to start a fire. So the ferro rods they have are quite a bit better and bigger than this. But so that's kind of a really important thing. So we have 2 contestants that decided against bringing that, which is, I find, is kind of interesting. And one of the guys, let me see if I can pull up his name here. James. There's one guy named James, and he, here's what he brings. Of course, he's missing the ferro rod, but he's got axe, saw, shovel, paracord, multi-tool, fishing line and hooks, 2-quart pot, snare wire, bow and arrows, and sleeping bag. And so it's interesting, during the pre-show they talk, they put the camera on each of these people and catch some of the thoughts. What do you think it's going to be like, and different things like that. And he was just kind of saying, well, you're really going into the unknown. You really don't know what is going to happen. All kinds of things can happen. And one of the things that happens to him in the first day is he loses his fishing line. Now, I can't remember if he said he lost the hooks too. They showed him in 2 separate packages, but somehow he had the fishing line in a pocket, and walking around that first day, he lost it. And he took 3 days trying to find it and couldn't. And what's sad is, of course, this was major part of his plan was to do fly fishing. I think he said he's a 3rd generation fly fisher. And so he's really good. And he says, he always can get something out of a lake, And so without that line, now he does take, I assume it's paracord, and he strips out some of the lines and he creates a net. Well, the first use of the net, he gets nothing. But So of course he's really discouraged, but I'm hoping that I could see that you can't fly fish with it in a strand of a of this white, fairly thick compared to fishing line, fairly easy to see and heavier line than a fly casting line, because probably if you shoot that out, the whole line drops, and it might even just scare the fish rather than him thinking there's just some thing hitting on the water that the fish can go up and eat. But hopefully he still has his hooks, and he'll be able to do fishing with bait in a more normal way. I'm not sure, but that was, and see, things like that you can't plan for. You think you've covered everything, and then something happens. In the previous show, season 1, this guy is, has quite a few skills and everything, and he trips and falls and has an arrow embedded in his thigh. Goes in like a couple of inches, he pulls it out. They have to extract him, and he has to go to a hospital, so he's, definitely out of the game. I think if they call you in for anything medical, you're automatically out, because of course that would mean you wouldn't have survived in a real situation. But it'll be interesting to see how he makes out. Now, the thing that was how the guy makes out with the injury, hopefully they'll talk more about him later, but this guy too, how he'll make out without that fishing line. One of the things that's interesting was, it's like, well, in the pre-show they showed the staff searching everyone's bags, looking in every single pocket, everything. So in other words, you're not going to be able to sneak something in. You're not going to be able to sneak in, say, an extra ferro rod or some kind of chemical tinder or something that could give you this actually quite a big advantage that you could hide somewhere. Well, you're not hiding anything anywhere. I often wondered about that, how difficult it would be for someone to cheat. So in other words, just the idea of bringing 2 ferro rods, you could have one, and if you lost it, you've got another one, And so now I know they're pretty careful to make sure that doesn't happen. But one of the things for this guy was getting to neat. Well, he has a high carbon steel belt buckle. Well, what's he going to do with that? He's going to start a fire. He goes and gets a piece of quartz. He probably has hit it, fractured it a little to get a sharp edge. And sure enough, he's hitting that high carbon steel, and it creates a spark, and he's able to start a fire. Now, what he does is brilliant, and Dave Canterbury called it the next fire philosophy, but, it's probably there long before Dave Canterbury, and he just put a name to it. But the idea is he wants, while this fire is going, to have his next fire being easier to make. Because, friction fire, even though you see it on TV, looks like they're doing it in, 10 minutes or something. Sometimes it takes hours. And yeah, there's guys on YouTube that go out and, in 2 minutes they get a fire, but they're not being dropped down in an area that's all soaked and, at some kind of, serious disadvantage. So what he does is he creates some char material. Now, most people that are into survival type things or bushcraft know what char cloth is. You take some cotton fabric, you put it in a container, and you bring it to a high temperature without a lot of oxygen. And when you get done, it still looks like cloth, but it's quite breakable, and it's all black because it's carbon. And basically that will take a spark really quick and turn it into an ember, and then that ember you can put into your more classic tinder, and that's how you can get a fire. It's much easier to get that way, going through the char material to the other tinder, than trying to get the spark from, steel and flint, basically, and this steel and quartz, but it's the same type of material, to go to this other tinder. That's a much longer process. If you got this other one, it really shortcuts the time. So he uses punky wood. He finds some wood that's kind of, decaying, and wood you can actually, squeeze it, and it squeezes. And so what he does is he buries it near the fire, and what that does is, again, it puts it at really high temperature with not enough oxygen, And when he digs that back up, he's got all of this nice material. And it's like, well, that's not going to work. It's all wet. Well, what he does is, and this is pretty good, is he makes a birch bark container with a very tight fitting bottom and top. So he takes that material and he makes this container. And he even demonstrated it, that he got the quartz and the high carbon steel buckle quite quickly to throw a spark, and it caught, the char material, and he's got this little ember, puts that over in his other tinder, and he's got another fire again. In ancient times, people would even carry fireplaces because fire can be enormously difficult to make depending on the situation. I know that Cody Lundin was a master in the first 2 or 3 years of Dual Survivor. But he got in one place where he was unable to start a fire. It was just, everything was just too wet. So, we'll see whether this guy, how this char material works out for him when it's really cold and maybe things aren't so dry. One thing about if you get a really good ferro rod, what you can do, there's two types. The hard type like this, the hard cheap type, but it's durable, so it can rattle around in your pocket, whatever. But then they have the premium ones that are usually softer. And some might think, well, why do you want something softer? It's going to break or this. Well, you want it softer because what you can do is slowly scrape some of the material off. And then when you do the high speed, the sparks go, they hit that, and then that ignites. And what that does is create a lot of heat in that one spot. So even if your tinder's kind of wet, it might start it anyway. And once you get that, that started, it helps dry out other things. So that's one of the reasons why a ferro rod is so much better than trying to do it a spark or the other guy. They call him Timber, but his first name I guess is Tim. Or is it? No, that's not right. But anyway, his nickname is Timber because he's worked with so much wood. That's what people call him. And let's see. Well, I don't have his name right here, but he has an opportunity. He sees a moose and he gets closer. He's kind of in the right situation. He does some calling for the moose and everything. He shoots 2 arrows, but he misses. And it's fun. Well, it depresses him wickedly that he missed this, because he's thinking, well, that was a once in a lifetime opportunity. That's never going to happen again. And he missed it. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's true. If that happened to him, so right off the bat, the opposite could be true, that maybe it's very likely that would happen again. I don't know, but he really gets, depressed about it. The things he brought were sleeping bag, the pot. He brought a ferro rod. I thought he didn't. Axe, saw, multi-tool, bow and arrow, paracord, snare wire, fishing line, and hooks. I wonder if that's the same guy. I thought they both didn't bring them, but yeah, that's not the same guy. I've got the wrong guy there. But anyway, this other guy does we'll forget about the fire part, but I'm pretty sure that person does a bow drill and gets it started right up. But maybe that was the other guy, the guy with the belt buckle. But on the moose adventure, there's a point at which he feels you can't get closer because the animal's, getting a little more wary. So he has to take the shot, but he misses. He says one of them even, he says, was going straight for the moose, and there was something he didn't see in the way, and it deflected some kind of little branch or something, and it deflected the arrow so it didn't hit the moose. Well, of course, the moose hightails it out of there pretty quick. The moose isn't stupid. He's experienced something that he thinks is dangerous. Off he goes. So, but maybe he'll have another chance, But there's this idea that whoever gets the big game wins the show. And it's kind of like, well, you can see how that can be true because they've got the food that, will make them last longer. One big animal, They don't have to do all that hunting. You get something like a moose with a couple 100 pounds of meat. If you can, process it and preserve it so it doesn't rot, so you can use it, then you want it to get cold quickly so the meat will freeze basically. And, one guy did this and he put it up on made a stand that small animals couldn't get into. And sure enough, I think it was a badger, went up on someone's thing and, stole some of the meat. And the guy later, shoots the badger, bow and arrow, and eats the badger. But, so there's quite a big advantage there, having that animal, if you can, you can do all the steps of, processing it, breaking it down. Big animal like that, you got to carry pieces of it. And two, I would think, all of a sudden you've got all of this red meat sitting around, and there's grizzly bears around. There's a lot of them. They're seeing footprints. Supposedly they can smell something like that from, like 2 miles away or something. So, there's a certain risk involved with having a large amount of meat too, just not from the idea that it could spoil and you could eat rotten food, to it can be attracting predators. So you may have to guard it. But, so, very interesting show. One of the women makes an attempt at shooting a beaver, but she misses. And she's not sure because I guess maybe the beaver was a little bit underwater. I'm not sure when she saw it. It's kind of hard to see sometime on the screen exactly what they're seeing, especially with the GoPro cameras are wide angle. So what you see as being really far away is really a lot closer. Like when this guy's shooting a moose, it looks like the moose is in the next town practically, but it's that wide angle view. And so with this beaver thing, I kind of didn't see it clearly. I mean, I could see the moose he shot at, but the beaver, it wasn't that clear. And so she makes the decision she has to go out in the water she wants to, she's hoping she's going to retrieve the beaver, but she ends up only retrieving her arrow. And she doesn't have to swim in. She actually can do it by, she takes off a bunch of the outer clothing because she doesn't want that to get wet. And she still has some clothing on and goes into the water. And I'm sure probably it's not really, I don't want to say underpants, some type of undergarment or whatever that she's wearing, or sports pants or whatever, bicycle pants, something like that. Those do get wet. And you can see her, she talks about taking those off, and she's going to bring them to the camp and dry out. But because, of course, getting wet in places like that is like asking for hypothermia. And if you don't have dry clothes and things, you could be in for a serious amount of trouble. Let's just say somehow she fell in the water with all her clothes on. It could be that she'd go back to camp and then end up having to tap out because, she can't get a big enough fire going, maybe not enough firewood to dry them clothes quick enough and everything. But, hypothermia can be really dangerous. And a lot of people die from hypothermia around the temperature of 55 degrees because people don't realize that they're still in danger. Oh, it's not that cold. And it's like, well, yeah, when you get wet clothing on, your body loses like way, way more heat. And so at only 55 degrees, you just need your body temperature to go down a degree or two, and then you start to be in serious trouble. And that can happen with wet clothes on, even when it's up to 55. So that's kind of what happened that episode. It'll be interesting to see the guy that lost the fishing line, if he's going to try. Like I say, I'm not sure about his hooks. He made the gill net and didn't get anything the first time, but hopefully he still has some hooks, and he'll try to do some more regular fishing as well. Oh, and the other thing, the guy uses his belt buckle to start a fire. The other guy with a bow and arrow, he's coated his quiver with beeswax inside and out. So basically, he takes the arrows out of it. He's going to use that I forget if it holds a gallon or two. That's going to be his canteen now. And he takes some rubber. You were allowed to bring leather hand guards or something you wear so that you don't rip some of your skin off when you're working shooting bows and arrows. And he takes that and he makes a quiver out of that, which looks pretty serviceable. Looks like it's going to work. The type that are mounted on the arrow rather than having to reach back for the ones on his quiver. So already he's got a canteen that he didn't, technically bring with him. And like I say, the other guy's got a fire steel setup that he didn't bring with him, repurposing his belt buckle. And this guy repurposing his quiver to have water. And he's saying the big advantage to that, of course, is, he can have water while he's eating. He doesn't necessarily have to heat water up each time, let it cool down, so he can drink and then cook something to eat or whatever. He's going to have a supply of water that he can add to it at any time. So it's just interesting how people are thinking out of the box. And I'll tell you, some of the people have a crazy amount of experience. Like there's a woman, her name is something like Makala. I probably won't say it right, but she's one of the indigenous people, and basically her lifestyle has been similar to what's going on here. So, or her ancestors, and she's very driven by the fact that she wants to reconnect with this idea of living like her ancestors did. But she grew up without running water. And one of the other guys, this guy from the South in the United States, and he grew up without running water too. So, there's different levels of people that have had, this guy, they hunted for food. They needed food, so they hunted. It wasn't like a sport that you went out with, you buy all your expensive equipment and everything, and you go with the boys once a year or something, try to get a deer like people do in Maine. It was like, you got to be hunting all the time if you want to eat. So it's like I say, it's interesting. Now there's one guy that's a librarian, but he's on a search and rescue thing, so he's not a slouch by any means. And he read the SAS survival guide when he was young, and that just hooked him. He's been practicing and doing things like that his entire life now, and so he gets this chance to go out and try it in a situation more where, he'll be depending on those things he learned rather than just having fun doing them. So that's two different things. So it'd be interesting to see how far the librarian gets. So there we go. Alone, season 11, in the Arctic Circle they are. Also, I noticed that I mentioned in one of the other videos that I was watching Alone, Australia, but it's filmed in New Zealand. And that's quite a bit better than their first season. And it appears that they're going to be releasing one of those per week on the History Channel or the History app. So they've got the first, season 2, episode 1 of Australia, Alone Australia. The first season they've got on there too, but that's almost comical. But I think that the second season is going to be quite a bit better. But they got more skilled people and things, but still some crazy things happen that you think wouldn't. But there we go. I hope you check it out. Leave some comments below. Bye.